My name's Raphael Rowe, and I spent 12 long years in prison for murder and robbery, crimes I didn't commit. I want you to imagine that you are me. You're 20 years old. You're in your flat, in your bed, sleeping. All of a sudden you hear loud noises. You're woken up. You go to investigate the noises. You wonder if somebody's broken into your flat. And what you're faced with is men in balaclavas pointing guns at you. These are not criminals. This is the police. You're thrown on the floor and your hands are cuffed behind your back with plastic cuffs. You're dragged out of your flat, put into the back of a police van and taken to a police station. You're then interrogated about murder and a series of robberies. You're being accused of crimes you know you didn't commit. Then you're charged with that murder and those robberies, and you're sent to prison. But not just any prison. You end up in a prison within a prison. You're 20 years old. When I entered the prison, I walked through the normal population where they house most of the prisoners in this old Victorian nick. And I went up some iron stairs and they banged the door. The slot opened. A man looked out. "One on," they said. They shut the slot, opened the door. I stepped inside with 2 prison guards and they shut that door before they opened another door. And then I walked inside the prison within a prison. And what that means is that this prison, this confined space, is built inside a prison for the country's most dangerous prisoners. And I'd become one of the most dangerous prisoners in the country. In that cell, I had my head in my hands and I wanted to cry. I was 20 years old in a man's prison within a prison. There was a window up in the wall, 3 sets of bars. It let in little light. There was no toilet and no sink. There was a chamber potty that I was expected to pee and poo in every day, which I did for the next 18 months. I'd empty it when they'd open my cell door alongside a number of other prisoners as we went to the slop out area and we'd slop out. So all this pee and poo was being tipped into the same space. Imagine the smell. I'd eat my meals in my cell, and the only other time I'd be allowed out of my cell was to go on exercise, and that was in a 20 by 20 cage. I stood in the number 1 court at the Old Bailey, charged with murder and robbery with 2 other men, 2 other black men. The victims of the crimes had described the perpetrators as 2 white men and 1 black man. Yet 3 black men stood in the dock accused of these crimes and then were convicted of these crimes, despite the victims' descriptions of the perpetrators. I was sentenced to life imprisonment, never to be released. At the time, the media were calling for hanging to be brought back. And if it had been, I would have been hung. And I wouldn't be here sharing my story with you today. I didn't conform to the regime, which made it even harder for me. Because every time the screws or the prison officers opened my cell door and demanded that I go to work or demanded that I do something like rehabilitation, I'd refuse. I'd refuse because I couldn't accept that I was in prison for a crime that I didn't commit. So I fought back, physically, mentally, psychologically, and for that I'd face the consequence. They would drag me down to the isolation block or the segregation block. They'd give me a kicking and then they'd leave me stripped naked and left in my own blood and bruises. The psychological scars and the physical scars I endured during those 12 years in prison were difficult. And that happened so many times, I become hardened to what it was like being isolated and segregated. So it's one thing being confined in a prison within a prison. It's one thing to be held in maximum security cells. It's another thing to be in the dark belly of the beast in the segregation unit, where there is no one but just you, a cardboard table and chair, and an iron bed. And I'd spend years over the years in isolation, in segregation, suffering because I was an innocent man not accepting my fate. The only way to fight my wrongful convictions was with a pen and piece of paper. Today you have the internet, you have access to smartphones and other bits of technology. You never get those in prison, but at the time I was in prison it was only pen and paper, and that's what I'd use day after day. I'd read the documentation that said I was a guilty man. Every line of every document over and over again, looking for bits of evidence that I could present to my lawyers to help me fight my conviction. The media played a significant part in my wrongful convictions by deeming us to be the UK's most dangerous man, painting this picture of the devils we were, even though we weren't. And so I knew the only way to get people to support my wrongful conviction was to get the media to write about my wrongful conviction. And so I embarked on a journalism course. To use the media, I needed to understand the media, and that's exactly what I did. Among all this, there was one thing that kept me going. I'd wrote to the journalist, I'd started to engage, they started to engage and ask questions about my conviction. But there was nothing more powerful than the hope I had within myself that one day my convictions would be overturned. And that hope turned to reality when in July 2000, the Court of Appeal recognised after 12 years that I'd been wrongly convicted and set me free. And that was a frightening moment. Mobile phones didn't exist when I went to prison. The internet didn't exist when I went to prison. Not like it does today. So when I walked out of the Court of Appeal and I shouted as loud as I could. I was 20 when I went to prison. I'm 32 now. All those years gone. Never to get them back. It was really difficult for me when I came out of prison because I'd lost the ability to do the things that you acquire just growing up. I spent the whole of my 20s locked up in prison, and so I'd lost the ability to develop relationships with people. I knew the insides and the outsides of prisoners, the manipulative prisoners, the vulnerable prisoners, the most dangerous and most fearful prisoners, people I had to live with day in, day out to survive during my time in prison. But I didn't know how to interact with normal people. I had to relearn those skills. I had to re-socialise myself back into society. And that was really difficult. It still is really difficult. When you spend the length of time that I did confined in a square space, you don't forget that. I went on to lead a very successful career as a journalist, and I used the meticulous skills I learned when I was in prison, fighting my wrongful convictions, reading every document and every line, using the paper and pen to help others when I got out, working on social justice issues and criminal justice issues, highlighting other miscarriages of justice. That became my weapon. That's what I used to inform people about other people's suffering or situations that were unfair. So although I wouldn't wish those 12 years on anybody, it's what made me who I am today. It built the character in me to make me the success that I am today. And what does that mean? That means I can share the hope that I cultivated during those years in prison and give it to other people. During lockdown, there were lots of people suffering far more than other people. We can't complain. It could be worse. We can look out the window. We can see the green. I couldn't. For 12 years, all I could see was the sky. I couldn't see the green. The only thing in front of me was a concrete wall. So when you're suffering or feeling that you're suffering during this lockdown period, reflect on what other people are going through. You still can make decisions. In prison, you can't. You still have choices. In prison, you don't. You can go for a walk around the park. In prison, you can't. You might want to go to nightclubs. You might want to go to bars. You might want to go to see your family across the country. In prison, you can't do any of those things. You don't have a choice. In fact, you can't see beyond the wall. You can open your front door and walk out. For 12 years, I couldn't reach for a handle on a door and open a door myself and walk out. I used to come up to a door and stand there and wait for a prison guard to open the door and let me through. I was conditioned. So when I came out of prison, I'd forgotten how to open a door. That's the psychological traumas of prison. What happened to me more than 20 years ago now. But I still live with the psychological and physical scars of my time in prison. But I don't let it hold me down. In the same way I would suggest that you today don't allow the past year or 2 years of lockdown, isolation, lack of socialisation hold you back. Because there is a way through it. We do get back to normal. We do start to do things that we weren't able to do previously because of our circumstances. And then it all becomes normal again. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. My life has changed. And my message to you is your life will change as you come out of lockdown. And it all starts with hope. I hoped in all the years that I was in prison that my wrongful convictions would be quashed. I'd be set free and I could go on to live my life. And I have. My convictions were quashed. I did come out and I have lived a very happy life since. I can. You will.